You're listening to the G&D show with Govinda and Dan of City of Bristol College. If you've got any comments or questions for us to read out on the show, then email us at thegdshowbristol@gmail.com. Again, that's thegdshowbristol@gmail.com. Let's get on with the show. Hello everyone and welcome to the G&D show. My name is Dan.
My name's Govinda.
We're here back once again for the Renegade Master. That is a very millennial statement.
It is, isn't it?
That is, isn't it? Yeah,
I knew you were going to sing that song at some point.
It had to go. I hear it every time I say we're back, and I want to say it. So now it's out. It's out. I've done it. I've said it. And only, unfortunately, many millennials. Some of you Gen Z will probably get that. You'll probably understand that. And you'll be like, yeah, I know the song, Dan. We can listen to music before we were born. Hello. But, you know, some of you may never have heard that song. Anyway, welcome to the G&D show. This week, we're going to hit on something quite serious. Very serious, actually. Very serious. But to touch base with the topic, Gigi's going to lead away with a quote, a phrase of the day. So what is it, Gigi?
Sure. So the quote for this particular podcast episode is the following. When people look at what motivates religious fanatics, conspiracy nuts, and political extremists, time and time again, what they find is abiding loneliness, rejection and social isolation radicalize people. In the absence of affection and understanding, people fall back onto delusional ideas of revolution and saving the world to give themselves a sense of purpose. So that's how I'd like to get the podcast started, with that quote, actually.
Okay. All right.
So what speaks to you with the utterance of this quote, Dan?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to me is the fact that we've been in isolation for the last year, and so it's not surprising that there's been a rise of far-right extremism over the last year on the internet, and there's been a lot of radicalisation. I'm openly going to confess that I have been not towards the right, emblazoned with passion towards certain things over the lockdown, just because I have been at home. I've been on the internet a lot, and I've caught myself and kind of gone, okay, you know, let me just catch myself here. Let me talk to my therapist about this one. You know, let me just, work this one out. But I've seen some things, I've read some things that have got me fired up about some stuff. But, I'm constantly catching it and going, okay, let's just calm down. Let's bring it back to center and find out exactly what's going on here. So I know that we're all vulnerable to it while we're stuck in our houses, because we can't just go out and live our life. So our world ends up being fed to us through our computers. And again, if we're not careful, we get fed misinformation, we get fed the poor information, we get fed the lies. And it's only really going to happen to people, as the quote suggests, who are isolated, like truly isolated and alone. And it's not to say that they don't have any friends at all, more to say that they don't have even one person who is of healthy and sound mind in their life, who's there as support to be able to say, that's a load of BS. Or just to say, that's not how I see it. I'm grateful that I have people like that in my life, and friends that I have in my life who I can, get on the phone with, or I play video games with, and we can talk about stuff, and they'll be able to share things that kind of go, what about this point of view and that point of view? I think if you don't have that, then that's how you end up in a place. And I think what's more frightening is you don't even realize that you're in a place where you've been radicalized, or even considered an extremist. You don't know. You really don't know. So you have to be incredibly careful about how you go about things, because you literally don't know. You think that you're on a righteous path to the betterment of the world. And what you don't realize is actually, you're radicalized, my friend. You're an extremist. Yeah. So that's what I would say. I'm gonna say you've got about a minute of this time left, Gigi.
Mate, you are a master at numbers and maths, in my opinion. The funny thing is, 100%. I think that people might be catching on to the serious tone of this podcast is a little bit less lighthearted as it normally is, and there's good reason behind that. Is because I'm just going to touch briefly upon what Dan said rather beautifully, because no one is immune to being radicalized, unfortunately. I see it throughout different communities as well, and what I really want to focus on is, notice that in that quote, I finished off the word finished off that quote with the word purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think purpose is something that we really, really need to check into. Yeah. Just because me and Dan talk about purpose, that does not mean, and that definitely doesn't mean that all purposes are going on a positive trajectory, right? Anyone can create a sense of purpose from anything, even extremism, even radicalized ideas and ideologies too. So we want to make that abundantly clear, but we'll talk about that later on.
You're listening to the G&D Show with Dan and Gigi. If you're interested in having any one-to-one conversations with us, or you want to join our group sessions on the other subject, then you can email us at thegdshowbristol@gmail.com. Let's get back to the show. To begin, I'm going to give a content warning, and I'm actually going to give a content warning if you are trans, if you are white, and if you are a man. I'm going to give a content warning to you because this next segment is going to be uncomfortable. But also, to be fair, it's not just going to be uncomfortable to you. It's going to be uncomfortable to a lot of people. But I think because of what Gigi and I have planned to discuss, unfortunately, those three identities fall right in the firing line of what we're going to discuss today. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to see if I can do this in a summarized manner. All right.
Yes.
Okay, so I use TikTok, as you guys know, and I got involved in this conversation using a number of posts. And effectively what took place was a post came out, it went viral, and they were talking about super straights. And the idea was that they were identifying as people who only dated cisgendered people, people who remained the gender that they were born with, which is kind of weirdly progressive considering they're identifying the fact that people can be born not the gender that they are assigned to. But anyway, the problem with it was, and the flags were waving, the red flags were waving all over the place when I saw this, was because people were jumping onto this as a way of giving the LGBT community a taste of their own medicine, which again takes that progression right away and turns it back to regression. The idea that people can just make up sexualities and make up genders and yada yada. And it became incredibly deflammatory towards LGBT people, namely trans people. Because again, it was the idea that they basically don't date trans people. That was the first flag that was waved all over the place. The second one was when I realized, I don't think I realized it, but I saw it. Did I see it first or realize it? I don't know. Either way, super straights, when abbreviated, is SS. And to no surprise, SS, for those of you who don't know, is association with the Nazi Party. And then people started to put the actual SS logo associated with the Nazi Party into their profile picture. And this thing, this flag, this emblem, this message, this symbolism started doing the rounds from TikTok to Reddit. It was on Instagram, I believe. It's all over the place. And it kind of piqued my worry. I was worried enough, I'm not going to lie. It was already bothersome when I first saw it. I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. But it really, really bothered me when I started to see it appearing in videos of people playing Roblox and Minecraft, which, for some of you who don't know, of course, these are games that don't have a top age limit, but they are literally games that anyone can pick up. A 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old can play, and they do. So now you've got an anti-trans rhetoric set up which aligns itself with Nazi ideology and Nazi symbolism, appearing in games for 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, but also doing a lot of psychological harm to trans people. This is all happening in real time as I'm watching it, where it's grooming particularly young men into an anti-trans and a Nazi ideology. And it has worked an absolute dream. It has worked just the way it needed to. Because while it wasn't just young men, and namely young white men, there were black men involved and there were some women involved in it. It was predominantly a vast majority of young white men who picked this up and ran with it. Some were doing it to deliberately troll, which is still horrific. Some did it because they genuinely believed that it was a sexuality. I'm going to go into that in more detail, but I'm going to let Gigi, you take it away from here, because I just wanted to set the picture of what we're going to discuss.
Absolutely. So just, looking back and reflecting at what you said and seeing these things happen so much, these movements happen so much online, I want to educate the listeners to knowing that as so long as there is a group identified as being the enemy, that is classic scapegoating and also radicalization. Okay. That is, it doesn't matter what form it comes in, it's not acceptable, period. Whether that's going up against you know, a certain gender, whether that's going against a certain race, whether that's going against a certain skin color, okay, whether that's going around someone's sexual orientation, yeah, even political orientation, whatever. As much as there's things I don't agree with, that doesn't mean that I'm not freedom of speech. I'm pro freedom of speech and choice.
Yeah, massively. Same.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
it, right? That's what it comes down to. But by the same token, you know, like I said, the telltale sign, the classic quintessential red flag is, it doesn't necessarily have to happen straight away, right off the bat, right from the get-go. It can happen a month or 2 months down the line before you start to see that. But I keep saying that history does repeat itself, unfortunately, if we're not careful and we're not being responsible and being discerning. So this is what I'm saying to people, is that if you identify that there's literally, it's hate being spewed out like venom towards a certain group, walk away immediately from that. Do not entertain it. 100%. And this time and time happens again. I see it all the time. I see it in very strange ways as well. You know, I see there's a group online that hates vegans, right? But it's not even a hate now. It's come to a point where the words, the imagery they're sharing use is hateful. Yeah. And I know that sounds like a silly example based on what we've already spoken. All I'm saying to you is they can come in many different ways, shapes or forms, and actually overlap the vile hatred or the vitriol that it throws at certain groups. That can overlap. One agenda can overlap with another one. There is no doubt about that. I want to make that crystal clear. That doesn't necessarily mean that an idea is isolated and independently going on there on its own. So of course it's very difficult to understand what someone's agenda is fully, but we can start to gather a picture, you know, when there are certain behavior patterns, certain words that are deliberately used, right? Because actually, I don't know if you agree on this or not, Dan, but you know, you see a lot of these people who actively on the internet, whether they have influence or not, they actively look at a younger audience to bring them into their own agenda. But you can kind of sense and tell that actually they sound like they're reading off a book, or they've got select phrases. Dare I say it, they sound like a walking, talking meme. There's nothing human about them. It's very robotic. And that's another sad drawback to it, is that you get influenced by these people, then you sound like those people. And when you sound like those people, you are no longer human. So this is such a large and big topic. And again, like you said, with so many different nuances, different things to take into consideration. But period, if it's hateful towards a group and that group is being targeted, no, that is not right. Doesn't matter what group they're, doesn't matter what their sexual orientation is, regardless.
No, it doesn't. And I think that's the most important thing. The moment you hear that someone's speaking ill of anyone, you kind of want to go, right, let's draw the line here and be very wary of what takes place further. The nuance, though, is the part that I do want to pick up on. And actually, it's funny, Gigi and I have already had a challenge in addressing this, but I think this is where it gets harder to talk about, and I think where people get less comfortable, because it's in the nuance where people, and actually, no, I'll set the tone here. This is a matter of perspective. This is actually where privilege comes into play massively, because if you are not aware of the benefits of being the identity you are, then you are going to see things being put upon you as the same as things being put on someone else, whether they're the same or not. For example, and this is I just pulled this out of my head. During an anti-mask rally, I saw a video of this lady during an anti-mask rally comparing wearing a mask to the police officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes.
Jeez.
She made a direct comparison between those two and was not messing around. She was not joking. So I think this is where perspective and privilege kicks in, because if you genuinely cannot empathize, sympathize, or even use your imagination to actually imagine what it's like to be a person less privileged than you, then actually I'm going to say this conversation is going to fall dead on your ears. You're really not going to like what I'm about to say. So I'm just going to set that tone now. If you think that trans people have it the same as cisgender people, if you think that women have it the same as men, if you think black people have it the same as white people, then you're really not going to enjoy where this conversation's going to go. But I'm going to set that tone right now. So I'm giving you the option to stop listening immediately. Okay? So when we talk about radicalization, yes, you can have an anti-women rhetoric. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. The anti-women narrative and rhetoric on the internet is out of control. It is so much easier to become anti-woman online than it is to be anti-man. And I remember seeing on Reddit, there was a whole conversation around how when you're talking to someone on Reddit, you actually assume they're a man before you assume they're a woman. You were more likely to assume they're a man than a woman. When you have icons like the Reddit icon, when you have the Discord icon, you're more likely to see them as a man than a woman, even though actually, technically, they have no gender assigned to them. There's no sex assigned to them. So the default falls onto man. The anti-women rhetoric is rife online. You can see it. Meme pages are the worst place for it. The absolute worst place for it. But yes, you can have anti-man rhetoric online. You can have anti-white rhetoric online. Are they the same in terms of the way that they're portrayed? Right? Yes, an anti-man rhetoric, the language may be used and so on, will be the same as anti-woman rhetoric in that you don't like that group. You don't like them. The impact, and this is where the nuance sits. This is where the difference sits. The impact of the language of anti-women hurts women far more, and historically has hurt women far more than it has hurt men. It actually still hurts men. The anti-women rhetoric actually still hurts men. It does hurt men. Because men can hate women so much to a point where, again, as we spoke about, they can become homophobic. That the slightest proximity to femininity actually means that they can't function.
No doubt about that. No doubt.
So actually the anti-women rhetoric hurts men as well. And it further puts men in a space of isolation, identity confusion, identity dysphoria, which can also then lead them vulnerable to radicalization. Right?
Yep.
So that's it.
It's a big wide door open for them.
Literally. The anti-black rhetoric hurts black people far more by a long mile. The anti-white rhetoric hurts white people. Far more. The anti-trans rhetoric of the super straights hurts trans people insurmountably in comparison to the anti-straight rhetoric. Insurmountably. I am not saying that these two things are anti-straight is okay and anti-trans is not. I'm not saying that. Neither are okay in terms of the rhetoric. But what I am saying is that what we want to be aware of is that while we want to stamp these things out, what we also want to be conscious of is that one is actually doing astronomical harm to human beings. One is actually doing serious damage to people. And we miss that part out. So that's why the red flag came up, where it was like, super straights are like, oh, I want to give them a taste of their own medicine. Because actually this has been part of the anti-black thing as well.
Yeah.
And I will say, if you're uncomfortable listening to this as a white person, and you feel like, and you're picking on little moments where it's like, oh, but this was racist and that was racist. Maybe it was racist, anti-white in an anti-white context. But let that be that moment that you were aware of anti-whiteness in that second. Now, imagine that that's been happening for the last few centuries. Let that continue on from now. Let this be the starting point. Do you really think that that's going to do well if that literally sits and festers for a few centuries? Would you like that to happen for a few centuries? Because right now, black people are sitting at the other end of that. So that's where I introduced the nuance. When people say, what about, right? Oh, but what about anti-man and what about misandry? Yeah, that's bad too. But you know what? I don't see a lot of men directly getting harmed from misandry. I'm seeing libraries worth of books being written based on what happens to women because of sexism. I'm seeing talk shows. I'm seeing women-only gyms. I'm seeing women-only spaces. I'm seeing women-only shelters. I'm seeing women-only prisons because of the harm that's done to women because of the anti-women rhetoric. So I just want to bring that in as part of the nuance that needs to be said, because we get it twisted when we think these two things are the same. Oh, they're doing it, so I'm going to do it too. We don't realize, we don't acknowledge privilege and how it really impacts us. And when we think something bad happens to us in our privileged life, and I say our privileged life because I'm privileged as hell, but I'm conscious and aware of mine. I know where my privilege sits. So I know that for me to speak ill of women, it's going to hurt women a hell of a lot more than if someone was speaking ill against men to me. Yes, it hurts. Yeah, I don't like it. But I know for the fact that actually, if I were to do the same thing, that's going to have a greater impact. I know that I could do women more harm by creating a safe space with men and talking bad about women in that space than a woman could in a space with women talking ill about men. I know I could easily. But I still want to stomp them both out, fundamentally. And I think that's what we want to be careful of with this radicalisation and giving them a taste of their own medicine and thinking, oh, it's women's fault and blah, 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 blah. Nah, stop. And be very careful when you hear people talk ill about other people. You really, really do want to be careful of that. So that's just the bit I wanted to say about nuance. Gigi, please.
No, thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for bringing that up. And I have vested interest in what you're saying for two reasons. A, because of the work that I do in my private work and my consultations that I do with my own clients, and relationships, for example, are plagued by this, right? So it's going off slightly, but it's still very important, is that in my work, I solely deal with relationships and look at childhood attachment theory. But Dan, have a guess at how many of my female clients report this vitriol and this hatred, chucked their way by the opposite sex? What do you reckon? Do you reckon it's a high percentage or a low percentage?
Mate, I immediately jumped to like the high 90%, if not every single one.
Absolutely.
Every single one.
Absolutely. So me, as a person who facilitates growth in that area, it's disheartening to hear these stories, because I never ever thought I'd be in a position, in a place, in modern day civilized culture, that we're still going to be dealing with this, right? Yeah. I'd like to think we've made some healthy progress, and yes, we have. But when you hear stories like this, it almost feels like one step forward and two steps backwards. Which kind of mitigates and nullifies any positive rapport we've made. And the interesting thing is, I wrote an article recently about how there is a so-called movement in relationship and dating, which is predominantly male-centric, and they teach all sorts of manipulation tricks against females, which again is a no-no. You shouldn't manipulate anyone. And secondly, they get invited in these men's circles, right? And they are glorified and labeled as being men's circles, and I'm not saying all men's circles are dark and shady, absolutely not my words, but these particular circles are all about, well, we have problems as men, who do we blame? Naturally we blame women. And if you just joined me and you heard that, I want you to hear all of the podcast, just in case you misinterpret what I said. Yes, they
just signed in.
I know, right? That'd be quite awkward. But anyway, yes, and this is what happens, and I'm seeing more and more of it. I see it in the way it is expressed on social media. I see it expressed on YouTube. I mean, for me, as someone who's interested in relationships, it is so cringe and vomit-inducing when I see a gent on YouTube trying to explain what's wrong with women right now, like as if he knows what women go through, right? Biologically, no, you don't know. You're not in that body, yes? It makes me sick to the stomach to hear that, right? And this is so weird. We're having this conversation the day after Women's International Day. And
that wasn't a great day for you, was it?
No, it really wasn't. No. Do you want me to tell her what happened?
I mean, I think what we'll do is we'll just put it this way. Hang on, I'm just going to Google it myself because I need to be reminded as well. And I'll let everyone know so that we stop having this happen, because I saw your instance was one instance of it happening, and I saw other people where it was happening. So guys, just so everyone knows, right, so we can stop doing this, International Men's Day is 19th of November, all right? Every single year.
Yep.
When it comes around to International Men's Day, let's actually celebrate it, right? And not do it in a way where we're going to be like, oh, women suck and blah, blah, blah. Because I don't see that on International Women's Day, actually. I see women being, I'm jealous of International Women's Day.
I believe so, yeah.
I would dream. I love it. And I know like people would say, all right, well then do it. But maybe we should actually. Gigi, this year, let's try and do something for International Men's Day. Let's actually do something. I love the way that women celebrate International Women's Day. It's so wholesome. And it really, I'm just like, oh, why? Why can't we? But instead, men want to know when International Men's Day is. And then when it comes around, it's like tumbleweed. So 19th of November, please. Yeah? Yeah? We're going to get on it? Let's do it.
Exactly.
Come on, people. Let's celebrate.
Don't forget as well, technically, we have Movember as well, technically, right?
Yeah, true. We got a whole damn month. That's true.
We got a whole damn month. We got a whole damn month to grow out that mustache, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't know a thing or two about mustaches, so drop me a DM. No, it's true. It's true. I mean, based on what we were saying, I know we kind of gone about in a roundabout way. So I'm just going to share this. I have nothing to hide. I had a very unsavory day on International Women's Day, right, Dan? I rather humbly said to you what's up on that day, and it was for me, it was a day of celebration. And I'll tell you why for me it's a day of celebration. I was raised by 4 women. They had a huge impact on my life. They've been huge role models for me. Yeah. And it's helped me understand women in a very different way. You know, I'm very conscious around the narratives and the conversations we have around that. But yesterday in particular, and by the way, I don't just reserve my appreciation for women just for International Women's Day, but it happens to be that I'm a poet. I'm celebrated to some extent, and I have a lot of female fans up there, and I've got tremendous respect for them. And so I happened to write a poem yesterday in solidarity to women's empowerment and you know, making some sort of progress alongside them. And the amount of just really nasty negative messages I got that just really threw me off yesterday. I know very rarely have bad days, but yesterday was a day where I was a little bit affected by all of that. You know, they weren't very pleasant. They weren't very nice. And in fact, one of the first comments were, well, dude, what about National Men's Day? Why don't you celebrate that? Why don't we have that? And we clearly do have that. Like Dan said, we have November the 19th and our whole month. Come on, if that's not enough? Yeah. Okay. And it was quite disheartening. And actually, what it got me to really realize is that, you know, God, there really is an issue. You know, there really is.
There really is. Yeah. So what? One final thing. Going back to the super straights issue, and I wanted to quickly bridge this gap because this is something that crosses colorism and racism as well as anti-trans rhetoric. Is this concept of preference over sexuality when you're talking about who you want to date? And I just want to make this clear because it has also been a point of contention when I viewed it, and I thought this, I assumed this, but again, I looked it up, I Googled it, and I did the research to actually figure out what was going on, right? I think the problem is, I need to say this actually, because when we've heard a lot of do the research lately, but unfortunately people have done the research and found out that apparently, you know, 5G causes coronavirus. So I'm gonna have to make this clear. Research, proper research is not going to a tabloid newspaper and reading an article. Almost any newspaper reading an article. Doing research is not getting an article off of Facebook. Doing research is not getting an article off of Instagram or a meme page, right? Where they say some stuff and then the caption is like, thoughts, what are your thoughts? That's not research. Research is not comments that people make on posts. Research is not, I'm a scientist, here's some information, yeah? Research is actually finding a peer-reviewed journal. Because and I'll say this, I don't even know how to do it. I don't actually know how to really read genuine, like, scientific research. I don't. When you look at the raw research of a person's work, there's a reason that people go through years of study to actually get to understand what that stuff actually says, right? And there's a really great demonstration someone shows us of how that raw research which takes place can be effectively fiddled and diddled all the way to where it reaches the newspaper article, and the newspaper article can say a very different thing from what the research actually says. So when I say this, what I mean is look at different sources. Look at different articles. Look at people who've got PhDs, master's degrees, right? Look at people who have accreditations to their name and the work that they do. And then also look at other information that counters said information. Where's their research come from? Then if you find that there's a huge discrepancy, look up that discrepancy. What's the discrepancy? Stay curious. Do not go to one article, because also this is another thing about statistics. A statistic on its own means nothing. A statistic without context or without another statistic to accompany it literally means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. Because there was another statistic that was doing the rounds that people heard. It was this 30. It was actually more to do with America, but it got over here in England, and I started laughing because I was like, "That's not even correct." Where in America, where 13% of the population are black, but they make up 50% of the crimes are some nonsense, right? So this was doing the rounds, and I kept seeing it. But again, the information was effectively false because people were saying they were committing most of the crimes. No, 50% of the arrests were of black people. And then you can look at the number of black neighborhoods that are over-policed. You can then look at the recent information which showed that the leader, one of the head guys of the FBI, was also the leader of the Proud Boys, a known white supremacist group. You could also look at the fact that the criminalization of black people in America has been going on for years. You can also look at the exoneration rates, where black people make up the most number of people who are actually freed from their arrest because they hadn't committed a crime. So that now suddenly you've got multiple statistics that tell a very different story of the very same thing that you're trying to perpetuate. So a statistic on its own doesn't mean anything. So I'm telling you this so that when you go out there and do your work, you do it properly. Please.
Absolutely.
So sorry, preference and sexuality. I'll say this very quickly so you get it. And then Gigi, you'll round us off, all right? So preference is something that changes. You prefer blonde hair over brown hair, right? But that doesn't mean that they have to be blonde. Your sexuality is not blonde people, all right? That's not a sexuality, right? Your preference is, which means you could meet someone with brown hair who's actually amazing, wonderful, beautiful, powerful, great, and you actually don't mind that they're not blonde. You prefer blondes, but actually, you know what? Someone with brown hair, cool, great, right? A preference with saying I prefer, let's say, and I will say this, the preference of white women over black women is that actually it's not that you definitely wouldn't date a black woman, because that's not a sexuality either. It's actually the fact that basically you have a preference to white women. Now here's the part where it gets messy. This is where you guys did not do the research and you don't realize what you're telling on yourself about. Is that for one, black women are stunning, so we'll stop that immediately. But also, I will say that where you are attracted to what you're exposing yourself to most of the time. That's what your attraction is based on, what you're used to seeing. That is it. So if you're looking at a lot of supermodels who happen to be white, well, guess what you're going to be attracted to? White supermodels. Simple as. If you look at a lot of black supermodels, guess what you're going to be attracted to? Black supermodels. And this has literally been shown in a session of studies that literally put people in scenarios where they've been thrown into environments where they don't see a lot of themselves reflected. So, for example, they've taken people from like middle white America to like the deepest of Asia and just let them wander around, and then they've given them tests on how attracted they are to the people they're around. Shockingly, they get the level of attraction they have towards the new environment they're in changes over time, because now they're getting used to seeing that face. I say this as well for myself, because growing up predominantly around white people, I was predominantly attracted to white women, right? But it wasn't until I got online, got on social media, and I started to expand my social circle that I realized it wasn't just white women I was attracted to, it was women, period. So that was literally it. Like, I was like, wow, no, hang on. But it was because I was seeing more women of color in my space. So when you have a preference of race, what you're saying is, I've only really seen this type of woman. Really? I haven't actually seen a lot of different races of women. I haven't. I've only really seen this type of woman. It's not something that's wired in your brain. It's not something that like, oh, I'm wired to like black women or white women. No, it's the fact that you have an exposure to a certain type of woman. That's it. And when I say you're telling on yourself, what I mean is you have not really broadened your pool that far. And that's women and men, by the way. That's any identity. You haven't really broadened your pool that far. You're only looking at one type of person, and you're only seeing one type of person. So I want to make that clear. Sexuality is when you literally are attracted. You get a natural sexual response to an identity. So a sexual attraction is, of course, straight being the opposite sex. Not super straight. That's not a thing. That's ridiculous. It's not a thing. It's a meme. Put it away, right? Then you've got bisexual. I'm attracted to both sexes, right? Pansexual. I'm attracted to all gender identities. There is asexual. I do not experience sexual attraction. Yep. And then there's homosexual. I'm attracted to the same sex. Okay. Now you might have a preference of trans people. That is fine. Where it gets transphobic is where you trash talk trans people. That's the problem. That's the problem. Don't say you don't date trans people because of horrible reasons, because actually that just means you're transphobic. That is the transphobia. You don't date trans people because it's a preference, but that preference is because you haven't been around enough trans people to realize that they're just human beings. And you can't see them as anything but the way they were born. You can't see them but the genitals they had when they came out their mama. That's what you're saying. When you say the reasons that you don't date trans women and they are horrific, that's what makes you a transphobe. And I'm going to make that abundantly clear right now. It's got nothing to do with your preferences, but actually to do with your exposure to those things. Okay?
Really wonderful way of putting it.
Yeah, if you don't want to be seen as a transphobe, be pro-trans, be pro-LGBT. Be a safe space for trans people to be themselves. Be a safe space for LGBT. Do that. Yeah? Doesn't mean you have to date them, but you never know what will happen. But don't be anti-trans and make that a sexuality. That's dumb. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's stupid. And it is transphobic. So get on with yourselves. Go on, be done.
It really is.
I'm finished.
Do you know what's so concerning about that, Dan, though? You gave me food for thought by saying that. Isn't it shocking and surprising to how someone can make their whole identity and purpose built around just hating someone or a group of people? Isn't that sad?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm sorry, like people, enlightened people didn't walk on this planet for that to happen. You know, it just really makes me feel, it's just weird. It's a weird sensation. Yeah. Again, we keep harping on about this, is that our mind looks for more information to do that. So you go further and down the rabbit hole of hate or whatever negative emotions you harbor towards people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's always going to field for it. It's always going to search it out in your environments. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of, like, you know, like when I said to you, Dan, how many orange motorcycles have you seen, right? Sports bikes, that is, not just the push bikes. And you probably haven't seen any. And guess what? Tomorrow you're going to go and see 5 now. So not only has an idea been plotted in your head, so you're now looking for it.
Yeah.
And now when you're looking for it, consciously, actively looking for it, you're putting your attention behind it.
Yeah.
So it's going to be there. And that's the other messed up side of all of this, when you start to espouse these ideas and adopt these really radical ideas, you know, towards these other people and the way, you know, they are. No, it's really, really something else, really. And again, so wrapping this up, you know, looking at what we spoke on this podcast, you know, Dan very eloquently put it about, you know, how nuanced these situations are and what the bigger picture actually looks like, because it's tricky. It's tricky to navigate through these worlds. Also checking into, you know, the people you're talking to online, right, Dan? That's another good point, isn't it? Like, you know, look, you're further scratch beneath the surface. You know, unless that person is completely enlightened already, or is a Buddha, I very much guarantee you they've still got an agenda. Yeah, they're human beings. They've still got an agenda, and maybe they haven't figured out what they're doing is actually quite dark and messed up, right?
True.
But that doesn't mean it's acceptable, right? And that certainly doesn't mean that we continue to perpetuate this narrative of us versus them. And then when we do get a reaction from them, we're like, see, they were like this all the time. When you back someone up against a corner, then you'll be prepared for a backlash. You know, that's the other thing. So provocation is a thing. You know, and a lot of these people know how to provoke people. They know that. And again, these communities want to be peaceful. They want to be happy. They want to have jobs. They want to have families. They want to just do normal stuff. Yeah. And you're making it even more harder for them by pushing all this stuff out there and poking fun out of them and provoking them and then gaslighting them after.
Yeah.
You know? Or saying horrible stuff about, see, this is always the true nature of this group of people. Yeah,
that's it.
You
You're
know,
absolutely right.
that's such a
Absolutely
stupid and moronic thing to do, you know?
Yeah. So true, man.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? And I'm hoping that if you are listening to this and you're one of those listeners out there who have always fancied opening up their horizons to new people, I'm hoping that this podcast will give you more faith and hope to do that.
Yeah.
I hope. I know it's difficult right now with, COVID. And of course, it's contradictory because we did say, be mindful of the people you talk to on the internet. But you get my gist. It's important. Wonderful things start to happen when cultures start to overlap with each other. You start to understand. There's less fear when you start to get exposure around these communities. That's what I say to people. It's very important. Yeah. Because you can never, ever rely on someone's opinion because it's so full of rubbish and bias and experiences that is never going to be yours anyway. So you might as well listen to everyone, but not influenced by it, but also go and find out for yourself what is and what is not, So that's my invitation, and I'm sure that's Dan's invitation as well, humbly and sincerely after this podcast, and that's it, really wrapping that up. And so as usual, it's been an absolute pleasure from Gigi and from
me. Yeah. I'm gonna round off by basically saying also final mic drop moment for me, Gigi, take it away after this, is that maybe, just maybe, if you are aligned with this super straight thing or you feel like you're super straight as well, maybe trans people don't actually want to date you.
Yeah, it's a good point.
You ain't all that, so cut that out immediately. Just want to leave it there.
That's a major mic drop, that is, definitely. No, I appreciate that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast, and please feel free to comment on the YouTube and or get your teachers to get in contact with us if you want any one-to-one coaching or some workshops as well. Oh wow, can't even speak right now as well. As usual, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's goodbye from Gigi and it's goodbye from Dan.
You've been listening to the G&D show. Thank you very much. If you've got any comments or questions, or if you're a student at City Bristol College and you want some one-to-one conversations with myself or Govinda, then please do email us at thegdshowbristol@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in another episode.